Stay tuned as we dive deeper into Mark's decision and what will happen next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next chapter in this unexpected journey. Mark's mind raced as he stepped out of the bistro and into the pouring rain. The cold, wet wind hit his face as he stood there on the steps, looking down at his phone. Eleanor's words echoed in his ears. "Marry me. It's a business arrangement." He had never been in a situation like this before, and his head was spinning. He had no idea who this woman was, but her offer, it was hard to ignore. His mother's mounting medical bills, his sister's tuition fees, and his own growing debt were all weighing him down. What choice did he have? He had no job lined up after graduation, and the thought of losing everything was too much to bear. Could he really do this? Could he marry a woman he didn't know, simply for the money? Mark shook his head, trying to push away the doubts. He had always prided himself on making his own way in life. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers. With a deep sigh, he pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey Mom," he said softly. "Hi, I need to make a decision. I'll call you later." He pocketed the phone and stood in the rain for a few more moments, before heading toward his apartment. The next day, Mark found himself standing outside Brooks' Bistro again, his heart pounding in his chest. He had thought about the offer all night, and now he was about to meet Eleanor
Look, this
again.
isn't the time for
He pushed
games.
open the
Are you
heavy
in
door
or
and
out?
stepped inside.
It's
This
more
time,
complicated
the
than that.
atmosphere felt different.
You know what's at
The
stake
warmth
here.
from the restaurant contrasted sharply with the chill that had settled inside. Eleanor was already there, sitting at the same table, her silver hair gleaming under the soft light. She looked up as he approached, and there was a slight smile on her face, as if she had been expecting him. Stay tuned as Mark begins his new life with Eleanor, where the line between business and love begins to blur. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this unexpected journey. The days that followed Mark's decision felt like a blur. He moved into the luxurious penthouse that Eleanor had provided, a space so vast and pristine that it made his small apartment feel like a distant memory. The marble floors, the towering windows with views of the city skyline, the high-end furnishings, it all seemed surreal. He couldn't help but feel out of place, like a visitor in someone else's life. Eleanor was always there, guiding him through each step of their new arrangement.
Look, this isn't the
But there
time
was a
for
distance
games. Are
between
you
them
in
that
or
couldn't
out?
be bridged by just
It's more
signing a piece
complicated
of
than
paper.
that.
She was
You know what's
polite,
at stake here.
even warm at times, but she kept him at arm's length. It was a business agreement, after all, nothing personal. The first event they attended together was a charity gala, an affair so glamorous it could have been straight out of a movie. Mark stood by Eleanor's side as cameras flashed and reporters scribbled down notes, all while he felt like he was merely playing a part in someone else's script. Eleanor was stunning, her silver hair gleaming under the lights, her presence commanding attention. She introduced him as her husband, the two of them playing the role of the perfect power couple. But as the night wore on, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt more alone than ever. "You're doing great," Eleanor said to him in a low voice, sensing his discomfort as they posed for pictures. "Just follow my lead, and everything will be fine." Mark smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He couldn't deny the perks of this new
Look,
life,
this isn't the time
the
for
financial
games. Are you
security,
in
the
or out?
prestige, the opportunities that had been
complicated than
so
that.
far out of
You
his
know
reach
what's at
before.
stake here.
But there was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a question that lingered. Was this enough? Was it enough to simply exist in this world, to be a companion to a woman who treated him like a business partner rather than a husband? The night ended with the usual farewell kisses and handshakes, and Eleanor drove him back to the penthouse in a sleek black car. The drive was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the rain against the windows. Eleanor glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "How do you feel?" she asked after a long pause, her voice breaking the silence. Mark turned to her, unsure of how to answer. He had been pretending to enjoy the life she had given him, but now, with her question hanging in the air, he realized he wasn't so sure anymore. "It's all just a lot," he admitted quietly. "I mean, this isn't how I imagined my life would turn out. I thought I'd have to work hard, make my own way.
Look,
And now,
this isn't the time
everything
for games.
feels
Are
different."
you in or out?
Eleanor nodded, her gaze
more
fixed on the
complicated
road
than that.
ahead. "I understand.
You know what's at stake
It's
here.
a lot to adjust to, but you'll get used to it. You'll see that we can make this work." Mark didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure what was more unsettling, the life that had been handed to him or the distance that still existed between him and Eleanor. He knew the arrangement was meant to be practical, but something in his heart longed for more. Could he really accept this as his new reality? As they arrived at the penthouse, Mark stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of his thoughts. Eleanor didn't wait for him at the door, her quick exit reminding him of the boundaries they had set. She was always a step ahead, always in control. Mark walked inside, the grand space seeming even more empty now that he had tasted a hint of what it might feel like to have something real. He sat on the couch, staring out at the city lights, wondering if this was how it was always going to be. He had everything he could want, and yet, he still felt like he was missing something important. The next morning, as Mark sat in the sleek, modern kitchen, a thought hit him like a wave.
It's more complicated
He had
than
agreed
that.
to this arrangement
You know
to
what's at
save
stake
himself,
here.
to protect his future and his family. But had he lost something along the way? Something that money couldn't buy? The door to the penthouse opened, and Eleanor stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She smiled at him briefly before setting down her briefcase. "I have a meeting in an hour," she said, her tone efficient. "But we need to talk later, Mark." Mark nodded, though his heart wasn't in it. He had a feeling he knew what the conversation would be about, and somehow, he wasn't sure he was ready for it. "Sure," he replied, his voice low. "Later." But as she walked away, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that later was never going to come. He had signed up for this life with Eleanor, but now he wasn't so sure what he was supposed to be doing with it. Stay tuned as Mark grapples with his growing feelings for Eleanor and the challenges that come with living a life that's not entirely his own. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. The days after that conversation with Eleanor were filled with an overwhelming sense of distance, both literal and emotional. Mark found himself slipping deeper into his role as her husband, though it still felt like he was playing a part in someone else's life. The events continued, one after the other, each more extravagant than the last. But despite the glamorous parties, charity galas, and private dinners with high-profile clients, Mark couldn't shake the emptiness he felt. He was surrounded by wealth and luxury, yet he had never felt more isolated. Eleanor kept their relationship strictly business, polite, professional, and devoid of any real intimacy. She was kind, yes, but distant. And Mark, though grateful for the security she had provided, couldn't help but wonder if he was meant for something more. One afternoon, as Mark sat in the living room, reviewing legal documents for Eleanor's latest project, he heard the door open. Eleanor stepped inside, looking as composed as ever. Her tailored suit was immaculate, her silver hair perfectly styled. But Mark noticed something new in her expression today.
You know what's at stake
There was a
here.
hint of fatigue in her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stood there, as if considering something. Mark put down the papers and stood up, concern rising within him. She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Just a bit of a long day. Meetings, paperwork, the usual." She sighed and walked over to the bar, pouring herself a glass of wine. Mark watched her for a moment, feeling a strange tug in his chest. Eleanor wasn't just the woman who had given him a lifeline. She was also someone he had started to respect, even admire. Despite the cold business arrangement they had, he couldn't ignore the pull of something deeper. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Mark asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard, even as it left his lips. He didn't know where it came from. Perhaps it was the way Eleanor seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. Or perhaps it was his own loneliness
It's more
creeping in.
complicated than that.
I mean everything.
You know what's
The
at stake
business,
here.
the events, the people. Don't you ever want something different? Eleanor paused, her back to him as she took a sip of wine. For a moment, Mark thought she might not answer, but then she spoke quietly. Mark nodded slowly, processing her words. He understood, or at least he thought he did. But there was something in her voice, a sadness that she tried to hide, that made him wonder if she had ever truly found happiness in all of it. Was her wealth and success really enough to fill the emptiness that seemed to follow her everywhere? He took a step closer to her, unsure of his next words. "I guess we're both just playing roles, aren't we?" he said quietly. "I mean, I signed up for this. To get out of debt, to help my family. But sometimes, I wonder if it's worth it. If it's enough." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, Mark saw a flicker of something real in her gaze. She set the glass of wine down and took a step toward him, her presence filling the room.
This isn't the time for
Mark
games.
stood still,
in
the
or
weight
out?
of her words sinking in.
It's more
They
complicated
had built
than
this
that.
partnership
You know
based on
what's at stake here.
practicality, on need. But now there was something else in the air. Something unspoken, something fragile. For the first time, he saw Eleanor not just as the woman who had changed his life with a business arrangement, but as someone who, like him, was searching for meaning in a world of money and appearances. The tension in the room lingered for a moment, but then Eleanor pulled away, her face settling back into its familiar mask of professionalism. "I'll be in my office," she said briskly, the moment of vulnerability gone. "We have a dinner meeting tonight. Please get ready." Mark watched her leave, his heart still pounding from their brief exchange. He had signed a contract, but he hadn't signed up for the feelings that were starting to emerge. He wasn't sure what was happening between them, but he knew one thing for certain. Things were starting to shift, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. Stay tuned as Mark and Eleanor begin to navigate the fine line between business and emotion. What will happen when two people bound by a contract start to realize they might want something more than just an arrangement? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of this evolving story. The days that followed the dinner meeting were filled with a strange tension. Mark continued to live in the penthouse, his days consumed with tasks that felt more like obligations than anything he actually wanted to do. Eleanor remained a polite and professional partner, guiding him through the motions of their business arrangement with a detached grace. There were no more moments of vulnerability, no more conversations like the one they had shared in the living room that night. Instead, Mark found himself slipping into the role he had agreed to play, the husband who wasn't really a husband. He began attending more events with Eleanor, sitting beside her at galas and meetings, smiling for the cameras, shaking hands with wealthy investors, but always feeling like a stranger in the world she moved through. Eleanor's world. He was a guest, not a participant. One afternoon, as Mark walked through the sleek hallways of the penthouse, he noticed Eleanor standing in front of the large windows overlooking the city. She was staring out, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Mark hesitated, unsure of whether to approach. But something in her stillness pulled him in. He walked over to her slowly, his footsteps quiet on the polished floors. She turned slightly, acknowledging him with a small nod, but said nothing. Mark stood beside her, looking out at the city. Below, unsure of what to say, the weight of the silence between them felt heavier than the words they had exchanged over the past few weeks. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She just continued to gaze out the window, her fingers resting lightly on the glass. Mark waited, his heart pounding as he stood beside her, unsure of what to expect. It was the first time she hadn't brushed off his questions with a smile or a change of subject. Mark looked at her, taken aback. He hadn't expected her to open up, not like this. He had been so focused on his own struggles, his own doubts, that he hadn't considered the weight she carried. Eleanor Brooks, the powerful CEO, the woman who had offered him a way out of his financial mess, was human too. She had her own doubts, her own loneliness. Mark felt a sharp pang in his chest, a sudden wave of empathy for her. Despite everything they had agreed to, despite the cold business arrangement they had made, he realized how much he cared for her. Not just as the woman who had given him a lifeline, but as a person. Someone who, like him, was trying to make sense of her choices. He turned to her, his voice softer than before. "I don't think you've lost everything," he said, his words tentative but sincere. "You still have your company, your legacy, and your ability to make a difference." But he hesitated, unsure of how to express what he was feeling. "But I get it. I understand what you mean. It's easy to get caught up in it all, to forget what really matters." There was a long pause as they both stood there, the weight of their shared understanding hanging in the air. Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark swallowed, the question hitting a little too close to home. He had felt that way more times than he could count, especially over the past few weeks. But he wasn't sure how to answer. Was he stuck? Or had he simply chosen a path that seemed like the only option at the time? For a moment, Eleanor looked at him with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. Then, just as quickly, her expression softened, and she turned back toward the window, her posture once again closed. Off. Mark watched her, the realization slowly sinking in. They were both caught in this arrangement. But perhaps, just perhaps, they were more alike than he had originally thought. They were both searching for something more than just business, more than just security. They were both looking for a way to make sense of the lives they had built, even if it was all a little broken. Stay tuned as Mark and Eleanor continue to navigate their complex relationship, where business, emotions, and desires collide. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next part of this story. The days that followed their conversation about feeling stuck felt like a slow unraveling for Mark and Eleanor. Though they hadn't spoken about it directly, the unspoken tension between them had only grown. They were both trapped in a web they had woven together, yet the distance between them seemed wider than ever. Eleanor, ever the professional, threw herself back into work, her schedule packed with meetings, deals, and more events. Mark, on the other hand, spent his days trying to fill the emptiness in his life, distracting himself with projects for her company and trying to keep his mind off the growing feelings he had started to develop for her. One evening, Eleanor called him into her office. Mark had been in the living room, reading through some papers when he received her message. His heart skipped a beat when he saw her name on the screen. What did she want now? The last few days had been quiet, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to dive back into their routine of superficial conversations and business talk. He made his way to her office, feeling a knot form in his stomach as he knocked on the door. Mark stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Eleanor was seated at her desk, her laptop open in front of her, papers scattered around her. She looked up as he entered, her gaze sharp yet tired, as if she had been working nonstop for hours. He sat down across from her, the weight of the room's silence pressing on him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Eleanor continued to look at him, studying him with those piercing eyes, as if deciding whether or not to say what was on her mind. Eleanor took a deep breath, closing her laptop with a soft click. She looked at him for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Mark's heart ached as he listened to her. There it was again, the sadness in her voice, the vulnerability she usually hid so well. He had never expected to hear Eleanor, the powerful, successful CEO, express doubt like this. It made her seem human, and for the first time, Mark saw her not as the woman who had rescued him from his financial troubles, but as someone who had been fighting her own battles all along. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes focused on the desk in front of her. Mark didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if he could relate to her in the way she needed, but he understood. The weight of expectations was something he had felt in his own life, though in a very different context. Mark felt a wave of empathy wash over him. He had started to see her as more than just a woman who had given him a second chance at life. She was a person, someone who was struggling in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. She looked at him, her eyes softening as she studied his face. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them felt different now, filled with something unspoken. Something that neither of them had been willing to acknowledge until now. Mark stood up slowly, moving toward her. He had no idea where this would lead, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep pretending. Neither of them could. They had been playing roles for so long, but now they were beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, they were ready to break free from those roles.
Look, this isn't the time
Eleanor
for
stood up
games.
as well,
Are you in
her
or
eyes
out?
locking with his.
It's more
I don't know what
complicated
happens
than that.
next, she said
You know what's
softly,
at stake here.
but I'm willing to find out. Stay tuned as Mark and Eleanor continue their journey, moving from a business arrangement to something deeper. Will they find what they've been searching for? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in this evolving story. The days after their conversation felt different. There was an unspoken understanding between Mark and Eleanor now, a shift that neither of them had expected. They didn't talk about it directly, but things were changing between them. Their interactions felt less like a business arrangement and more like something real, something deeper. Eleanor was still the composed, powerful CEO, but Mark could sense the walls she had built around herself slowly starting to crack. He had noticed the little things, the softer tone in her voice when they spoke, the way her eyes lingered a little longer on him than before, and he couldn't deny it anymore. He was starting to care for her, more than he had ever expected.
Look, this isn't
but with
the time
every
for games.
passing
Are
day,
you in
the
or
pressure
out?
of their contract,
It's more
of their
complicated than
arrangement,
that.
weighed heavier
You know
on
what's
him.
at stake here.
One evening, as the sun began to set and the city lights started to flicker on, Mark found himself in the living room of the penthouse, staring out at the skyline. It was a typical evening, but tonight, something felt different. Eleanor had been in meetings all day, her presence in the penthouse rare these days. Mark's mind was consumed with thoughts of her, the way she had opened up to him, the vulnerability she had shown in their last conversation. He had never expected her to let her guard down like that. But now, he wasn't sure where he stood. Were they still just partners in this business arrangement, or had things truly begun to shift? As Mark was lost in his thoughts, Eleanor entered the room, her heels clicking softly on the marble floors. She looked tired, but there was something about her that seemed more human tonight. Mark turned to her as she walked in, his heart racing for a reason he couldn't explain. Eleanor paused for a moment, looking at him. She didn't smile back right away, but there was something in her eyes, a softness, a recognition that hadn't been there before. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He took a step toward her, his voice gentle. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, as if considering his words. Then, for the first time in a while, she took a deep breath and smiled. A real smile, not the polite one she usually wore. Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him, but also a new sense of uncertainty. What did she mean by that? Were they still just partners, or was she saying something more? Eleanor took a step closer to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him by surprise. Mark felt his heart race as he looked at her, unsure of what to say next. He had spent so long trying to keep his emotions in check, trying to follow the terms of their contract without letting himself get too close to her. But now, with her standing so close, with the vulnerability in her eyes, he realized how much he had already let her in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the city outside, the gentle rhythm of the world continuing on as they stood there, caught in a moment of unspoken understanding. So what now? Mark asked, his voice quiet, but filled with the uncertainty of everything they had yet to figure out. Eleanor smiled again, this time with a hint of mischief in her eyes. We take it one step at a time. Mark nodded, a sense of clarity settling over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like they were both ready to face it together. Stay tuned to see what happens next as Mark and Eleanor continue to navigate their growing connection. Will they find a way to make their relationship more than just a contract? Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in this evolving story. Days passed, and with each one, Mark and Eleanor grew closer, yet the line between business and something more became increasingly blurred. They still kept up appearances, attending events together, posing for pictures, and smiling for the cameras. But the moments they shared in private were different. There was an ease between them now, a subtle understanding that hadn't existed before. Eleanor still carried herself with the authority of the CEO, but Mark could see past that. He could see the person she was beneath the surface. And in return, he felt seen, too. They shared quiet dinners at home, talking about everything and nothing, and Mark began to wonder if this was what it meant to build a life with someone, even if it was all supposed to be temporary. But despite the growing closeness between them, there were still moments of doubt. Mark couldn't ignore the nagging voice in his head that asked, was he getting too attached? Was he starting to care for Eleanor in ways he shouldn't? The contract they had signed, after all, was still in place, and nothing had changed about their arrangement. They had agreed to keep things strictly professional, and he had no idea what would happen once their time together ended. But each time Eleanor looked at him, when her gaze softened or when she brushed his hand by accident, that voice quieted a little. Still, the uncertainty lingered. One evening, as they prepared for another gala, Mark stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. He had never been one for these kinds of events, but tonight felt different. There was a palpable energy in the air, a mix of excitement and nervousness that he couldn't quite place. Eleanor was in the bedroom, finishing up. She had been unusually quiet all day, and Mark couldn't help but wonder what was on her mind. The tension between them was undeniable. They had both started to act as though they were more than just a business couple, but neither of them had said it aloud. The fear of crossing that line was real. Just as he finished with his tie, Eleanor entered the room. She was dressed in a stunning black gown that hugged her figure perfectly, the dress shimmering under the light. Her hair was done up in elegant ways, and she looked every bit the powerful CEO. Yet when her eyes met his, Mark saw something more, a vulnerability, something unspoken that passed between them. She smiled, but it wasn't the usual smile. It was softer, warmer, Eleanor paused for a moment,
Look, this isn't the
looking at
time for
him
games.
as if considering
Are you in
something.
or out?
Then, in a tone
It's
that
more
was barely
complicated
above a
than that.
whisper, she spoke.
You know what's at stake
His
here.
heart skipped a beat at her words. He knew they couldn't keep pretending forever, but hearing her say it out loud made the weight of the situation feel real. Eleanor took a deep breath, stepping closer to him. I know we've both been keeping things under control, but I don't think I can do this anymore. This arrangement, it's becoming more than just a business deal for me. And I think it's the same for you. Mark's stomach tightened as she spoke, the words he had been fearing finally out in the open. He nodded slowly, his own feelings echoing hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but there was a sense of relief in it as well. The unspoken tension had been released, and now they were left with the truth of what they had both been feeling. Eleanor reached out, her hand finding his, and in that simple gesture, Mark felt everything shift. Mark squeezed her hand, his voice firm but gentle. I think we are. I'm ready if you are. In that moment,
Look, this isn't the time
Eleanor
for
let out a
games.
soft
Are you
breath,
in or
a
out?
small, relieved
It's more
smile
complicated
tugging at
than
the
that.
corner of her lips.
You know what's at stake
Then let's
here.
do this, she said. They stood there for a moment, just holding each other's gaze, both realizing that this wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. It had never really been. It had evolved into something more. They didn't know what the future held, but they were willing to face it together, without the masks, without the contracts. Just Mark and Eleanor. Stay tuned as Mark and Eleanor take the next step in their journey. What does it mean to let go of the past and embrace something real? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in their evolving story. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and realizations for both Mark and Eleanor. They had crossed a line, but not in the way they had feared. What had started as a business arrangement had transformed into something far more profound. They no longer had to pretend, no longer had to hide behind the contract that had initially bound them together. The walls between them had come down,
Look, this isn't the
and
time
what
for
stood in their
games. Are
place
you
was a
in or
connection
out?
that neither had expected,
It's more
but
complicated
both
than
had
that.
come to cherish.
You know what's at
Eleanor
stake
had
here.
been hesitant at first, unsure of what taking that step would mean for her. But now she found herself looking at Mark not just as a partner, but as someone she could rely on, someone she could trust. For Mark, the shift was equally life-changing. He had come into this arrangement out of necessity, a way to escape the crushing weight of debt and uncertainty. But somewhere along the way, he had begun to see Eleanor not just as the woman who had saved him, but as someone he admired, someone he cared for deeply. The feelings he had tried to suppress had blossomed into something real, and now he stood on the precipice of a future he hadn't expected, but one that felt right. They had both been afraid of getting too close, afraid of what it might mean for their arrangement. But now, they were ready to embrace it. They were ready to see where this new chapter would take them. It was late one evening, a few weeks after their conversation, that Mark took Eleanor by surprise. They had just returned from another successful event,
Are you in
the
or
kind where
out?
they were still the picture-perfect couple,
complicated than that.
smiling for photos
You know what's at
and
stake
mingling
here.
with the elite. But tonight, something felt different. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, unwinding after the evening's festivities, when Mark came up behind her and gently placed a small box on the coffee table. She looked at him, confused but intrigued. Mark smiled and sat beside her, his heart pounding. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, he said. I know we've been through a lot together, more than I ever imagined when I first walked into your office. But in all of it, I've realized something that I should have said from the start. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. What is it, Mark? He took a deep breath, then opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, a symbol of commitment, not of the contract they had signed, but of the journey they had taken together. It wasn't grand, but it was meaningful. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the ring, then at Mark. For the first time, she saw him not as the man she had
Look,
helped,
this isn't the time for
not
games.
just as her
Are you
husband
in
on
or
paper,
out?
but as the man who
It's
had
more
stood by her
complicated than
side,
that.
who had cared
You
for
know
her
what's at
even
stake
when she
here.
wasn't sure if she deserved it. Mark took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her fingers. You don't have to deserve it. You already have it. And I already have you. With a soft, shaky breath, Eleanor smiled. It was a smile of relief, of release. It wasn't just about the ring. It wasn't just about the promises they made, but about the trust they had built, the connection they had forged, and the understanding that no matter what came next, they had each other. She nodded slowly, the words finally coming to her. Yes, Mark. I want this. I want us to be real, too. They leaned in, and for the first time since their journey began, they kissed, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but out of love, out of a connection that had started as a business deal, but had blossomed into something far more meaningful. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, they didn't fear it. They knew whatever came next, they would face it
This isn't
together.
the time for games.
Stay
Are
tuned
you
as
in
Mark
or
and
out?
Eleanor embark on their
It's more
new journey
complicated than
together,
that.
where love,
You know what's at
trust,
stake here.
and a new beginning await. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in this evolving story. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story.